Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our virtual lecture series entitled Discover Ukraine, History, Culture, and its People. This event has been organized by the Basis Study Group for Minority History. We would like to thank our partners, URIS, Ukrainian Research in Switzerland Initiative, Universidad Internacional de Cuernavaca, Oriente Medio News, Neighbrid Chile, and Círculo Israelita de Santiago for bringing this course to Latin America. We would like to remind you that this is a fundraising event for Razum for Ukraine Emergency Response, and I will send a link to all of you in a message shortly. My name is Olena Palko, and I'm a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow at Birkbeck College in London and a co-convener of the Study Group for Minority History. We will be recording this session, and the video will be available on the Study Group YouTube channel, as well as on the Study Group webpage. You can find the recording to our previous sessions there. And I will be sending you the recording tomorrow to all those registered for the course. Please remember to send your questions either to me directly or keep them until the end of the lecture if you wish to ask them directly. Today, this is our last session, and it has been almost 2 months since we started this course. And it has been more than 3 months since the war in Ukraine basically escalated, since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia that started on the 24th of February 2022. And during these 2 months, we learned already a lot about Ukraine's history, its identity, Ukraine's culture. And this lecture is a special one. It's my great pleasure to welcome Anna Chebotarova, a sociologist, who will talk today about Ukraine's developments since 2014, so since the start of this war between Ukraine and Russia. So let me introduce our speaker today. Anna Chebotarova is a sociologist and a research fellow at the Department of Literature, Area Studies, and European Languages at the University of Oslo in Norway. She's engaged in the international project entitled National Values and Political Reforms in Post-Maidan Ukraine. Before, she worked as a coordinator of the Ukrainian Regionalism, a research platform project at the at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. She is also affiliated with the Center for Urban History in East Central Europe in Lviv in Ukraine. Her presentation today is entitled Society in Turbulent Times, Ukraine after 2014. Thank you, Anna, for joining us and for offering this concluding lecture. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Olena. I will share my screen in a second. Just a second. I hope that now you can see my screen and hear me. Thank you very much to everyone who has joined us today to talk about this difficult topic. And thank you particularly to our audience across the ocean, but also to our audience in Europe, for whom it's already quite late in the evening. My name is Anna Chebotarova, and I'm originally from Lviv, Ukraine. And today I will be talking about the topic that is, in fact, not so easy to discuss and present in this time when we all, but particularly people and researchers from Ukraine are constantly engaged in this emotional roller coaster of checking the news all the time, of being worried about our friends, family, and colleagues in Ukraine. But of course, first and foremost, this is a really daring time for people who are now in Ukraine. I was thinking a lot what images to choose for my presentation. Today I will mostly speak with the statistical graphs and maps. And of course, the current war has produced so many drastic and heart-stopping pictures. But just as a starting point for my lecture, I'd like to tell you that today it is the day of protection of children in Ukraine. And the first image here shows a quite a moving commemorative event that happened today in my city, showing 240 empty seats in school buses that symbolize the children that have been killed in the full-scale war in Ukraine. Of course, this number is much higher. We are talking only about some official numbers, but first and foremost, the full-scale and the protracted war has brought a very huge human cost to Ukraine, and thousands and thousands of lives that have been lost and are being lost every day is the major change and the major tragedy that Ukraine has been enduring through these years. And this is something that I want to highlight from the very beginning. However, when it comes to the agenda of my lecture, I will talk about what effect did war, both protracted military conflict since 2014 and the full-scale Russian invasion in 2022 had on Ukrainian society and on public opinions. And I will use a number of survey results by Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, Rating Group, and other sociological companies that have been working in Ukraine since 1991. And something that is already a symptom in itself is how strong and how powerful is the sociological tradition in Ukraine. So the sociological analysis of Ukrainian society have been very actively developing since the first years of independence. And it has also played a very important role in the democratic transformation of Ukrainian society. Particularly, I'd like to highlight the importance of exit polls that have highlighted the differences between the official results of the elections and the exit poll results, helping to challenge the attempts to defraud the elections. So my colleagues, the sociologists in Ukraine, they have worked under very daring conditions since February. But what is also very important that they continue to operate and they continue to analyze what is happening in Ukraine and in Ukrainian society. And for those of you who would like to maybe engage in some cooperative projects or have a more detailed data and analysis, I really recommend you to contact them. And it's very important that they operate working. It's also kind of a symptom of Ukrainian resilience, the way the sociologists are working today. So the map that I want to start my lecture with today is actually the map of results of 1991 Ukrainian referendum, where one question has been asked: do you support the act of proclamation of Ukrainian independence? And as you can see here, a majority of people in absolutely all the Ukrainian regions, including Crimea, have voted for that idea. Therefore, this title about Ukraine as an unexpected nation, it's the reference to a famous book by Andrew Wilson, but we can see that actually Ukraine started its way with quite a powerful drive for independence. Of course, for many people, these meant different things. So for some of Ukrainians, independence was their patriotic dream, the dream of nation state, of Ukrainian nation. But for other people, it was also the practical idea of being more successful apart from the powerful center in Moscow. So Ukraine actually has started its way as quite a successful economy with very rich natural resources, with very big industry. And many people has hoped that this will be the ground for economic success of Ukraine. Of course, the road of post-communist transformation in Ukraine has been quite bumpy, and there were numbers of obstacles to the political and economic success of the country, particularly in the early 90s. Some of them are quite common for post-communist space. Some are particular for Ukraine, like, for example, the rapid privatization of state-owned assets that resulted in the formation of oligarchic clans, many of whom had deep roots in neo-Soviet nomenclatura. Ukraine has repeatedly been in the ratings of states with a quite high perceived corruption, and as a result, structural inequality. So these obstacles have, of course, resulted in a disappointment for many people, and the decreasing level of their lives. And if we are to choose the one buzzword for what was happening in Ukrainian society in the first decades of independence, I would choose the word of ambivalence. It's quite a famous theory by Ukrainian sociologist Eugen Holovacha, who have argued that for Ukrainian society, the parallel orientation towards mutually exclusive values, such as orientations towards East and West, or both Ukrainian independence and closer union with Russia, democracy and Soviet nostalgia, was the most typical characteristic in the early years of independence. And of course, this ambivalence, it can play double role. On the one hand, it protects individuals from the psychological trauma of radical changes, but also it cannot last long without having some destructive social and psychological consequences. And this ambivalence had both individual dimension and also societal dimension. As I will talk about it a bit later in my presentation, the parallel orientations have often taken regionalized dimensions. But what is quite particular for Ukraine, and what, for example, differs it from its two neighbor states, which happen to be now the aggressor states in this war, is the changeability of political elites. So you see here the portraits of the presidents of Ukraine, which since 2000 have been changing every 5 years, not without turbulence, not without revolution and military conflict, but this competition of elites have been quite persistent. Whereas in Russia, as we see, the situation has been quite homogeneous, and unfortunately, the part of picture about Belarus is cut a little bit here, but from this bold forehead, you can see that basically the president of Belarus has been unchangeable since early 2000s. And there are many ways of explaining this phenomenon in many theories, but I find the theory by Lucan Way about pluralism by default quite interesting. So he argues that it's not only strong civil society or powerful or democratic political leaders that can ensure this political competition, but actually the weak state and also the competing oligarchic clans, the competing economic clans in the state, they can result in the impossibility of imposing the authoritarian rule in a democratic international context. And he brings also the example of Moldova to this equation. And another important factor was the diverse and contradictory nature of Ukrainian nation-building project, oriented on the one hand towards closer union with Russia, and on the other hand towards integration with West and Europe. And this competing nation-building projects have also ensured political competition in Ukrainian society. And at the same time, it might undermine the development of a stable democracy in Ukraine. And for many of you who haven't heard much about Ukraine, I'm quite sure that one thing that you might have heard is that this is a society that is deeply divided linguistically, culturally, historically, between pro-Russian East and pro-European West. And of course, the sociologists, the political scientists have studied these divergent attitudes in the society. And if you think about other countries, this is actually quite typical. Think about US or Poland or UK. But the biggest problem with Ukraine that these differences and these divergences started to be very quickly politicized. And as an example, here are the maps of 2004 and 2010 elections, showing precisely this like divide that has later been taken to the extremes by certain political technologists. And I wanted to show you a very radical example, but the one that also plays the role today and is important in contemporary context. So on the left, you can see the map that was produced by Kremlin spin doctor Timofey Sergeytsev. It's a black PR campaign against the presidential candidate Viktor Yushchenko that claimed that he divided Ukraine into three types and three sorts. The former, the Western Ukraine being like the better one, and the Eastern the worst. And this map had a very destructive effect and very polarizing effect on the Ukrainian society. And the same author, the same spin doctor, have published very recently in April 2022 an article in the Russian media outlet RIA Novosti entitled "What Russia Should Do with Ukraine." And basically, this is the justification of Putin's denazification campaign and de-Europeanization of Ukraine. But basically, any researcher of genocide will tell you that this article quite heavily uses the genocidal language and the genocidal lexicon. And it's just one of the examples that shows the presence and the influence of Kremlin political technologists, spin doctors, and also security agents that have been very much infiltrated into Ukrainian political space since the early years of independence. So actually the strategies of keeping Ukraine in this buffer zone or in the zone of influence of Russia have been quite diverse and included such strategies. And what is particularly striking for me is that this political technologist, this spin doctor, has consulted very diverse politicians, including, for example, the pro-European Arseniy Yatsenyuk. So the idea of divided Ukraine should never be taken for granted. And whenever you see that in some press media, I urge you to think about that critically and to think about all the political technology background that it brings. So this was just a short introduction to where Ukraine found itself in 2014. So the Euromaidan revolution, which many of you have probably heard about or even studied, has started as a peaceful protest in favor of signing the association agreement with EU, But unfortunately, because of escalation and because of the politics of Yanukovych government, turned in a very bloody protest, resulting in more than 100 victims. Moreover, it wasn't the movement that really united the Ukrainian society, even though when the sociologists asked about particular demands of the Euromaidan, like fighting corruption or ensuring the rule of law, the majority of Ukrainians supported it. But the movement of itself have really been politically polarized and presented as the one that is dividing the Ukrainian society. And therefore, as we can see on the map on the left, the attitudes towards Euromaidan were quite divergent. Therefore, as the annexation of Crimea and subsequent war in Donbas didn't happen, it would have been a complicated legacy and road to overcome. And I'm sure that the ways that Ukrainian society could have been influenced after the Euromaidan could be very diverse. However, as we know, President Putin and political elites of Russia have taken the decision to annex Crimea. And from that point on, of course, the Ukrainian society have had a very united response, and absolute majority, more than 80%, considered it as illegal annexation. And the war in Donbas, I'm gonna talk about the time period from roughly April 2014 to February 2022, has resulted in a number of casualties. So the overall number of victims is more than 14,000 people, among whom 3,400 are civilians. And as we can see on this map on the left, together with Crimea, around 7% of Ukrainian territory has been occupied. Moreover, it had a very high human cost also in terms of internal displacement, as more than 1 million people have fled the war internally in Ukraine. So there were some who fled also to other European countries or to Russia, but mainly it was the history of internal displacement. And here on the map, you can see the percentage of people in each oblast, in each region, the percentage of IDPs. And we can see that actually majority remained in Ukrainian-controlled Donbas or in eastern Ukraine, which, if you think about it now, means that for most of those people, it's already the second experience of bloodshed and war, and also for many second time displacement, because now they are again forced to leave, to flee the areas that they've inhabited and where they tried to rebuild their life anew. This conflict had various stages, this protracted war. And at the beginning, it was very high intensity conflict. We can see the losses of Ukrainian army in different stages of war. And from 2015, after signing the second Minsk agreement, the intensity have decreased. However, as you can see, there is not a single month when Ukrainian soldiers haven't been killed. So actually, many people kind of forgot about this war. It was the most forgotten European war for this period of time. But for Ukrainian society, it is something that have been constantly going on and that have been part of their reality and life for more than 8 years. What were the attitudes towards this conflict, and what were the solutions that people supported? Actually, Ukrainians were kind of divided what should be the strategy towards Donbas conflict. More than a third supported negotiations and compromise, and around the same number, though a little bit lower, thought that Ukraine should fight militarily for these regions or refuse to fight for them at all. Similarly, the Minsk agreement, the Minsk peace agreement, also did not have unified support, and many people have seen the dangers of this document and the ways that actually it can undermine and endanger Ukrainian independence. And another aspect that I would like to highlight is the fact that during these years, there hasn't been a lot of sociological research done in the non-government controlled areas of Donbas. There were some interesting projects, particularly telephone interviews. We cannot say that they are representative, but they show us an interesting picture of what has been going on in the occupied territories. I wouldn't go too much into details, but my general conclusion from these projects, from this data, is that we could clearly see how these two parts of Ukraine, so the government-controlled and the non-government controlled, have been drifting apart. So the more time has passed, the more divergent and different and sometimes opposites the attitudes, the values, and the future prospects of these of people in these areas became. And particularly, this was exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, when the checkpoints on the contact line have been closed, and for people to go to Donbas to visit their families, for example, it took more than 20 hours, and they had to travel via Russia. So the amount and the number of human conflict between these areas has decreased significantly. And I think this is really something to remember when now we are hearing the talks about appeasement and about the idea that Ukraine should, give up certain territories and let them be occupied for the price of peace. That the longer such occupation lasts, the more difficult it is for people later, in the event of deoccupation, to come together. When it comes to major shifts in public opinion after the 2014 beginning of war in Donbas, first and foremost, we can see the clear tendency towards salience and strengths of Ukrainian identity. So remember the map that I showed you in the beginning, more than 90% of people supporting Ukrainian independence. As we can see, over the years, this support has decreased, particularly in the southern and eastern part of Ukraine, but it has re-increased again in 2016. And the idea that Ukraine should be independent state has become again overwhelmingly popular in all Ukrainian regions. Moreover, the question about how proud you are to be Ukrainian citizens also shows us very similar tendency. The strong increase of pride in being Ukrainian citizen after 2014, and then again after 2019, the landslide victory of Volodymyr Zelensky, current president of Ukraine. We've asked people about how strong they feel, either Ukrainian or European, Russian, and we can see that the attachment to Ukrainianness, the strengths of Ukrainian identity have grown, as opposed to a Russian identity becoming less and less popular. And we can see the clear feeling of alienation with Russianness. However, what I also wanted to highlight is that even in 2013, more than 80% of people declared that they are Ukrainians, and this number was high all around the country. So we cannot say that this civic strong civic identity, strong association with Ukrainian citizenship has been born only after 2014. It has actually been quite a persistent tendency, which was then fueled by the military conflict. And of course, one of the most complex questions in Ukraine is the question of native language. And we can see the strong increase of a number of people who say that their native language is Ukrainian, and the opposite tendency being for Russian. But one should remember, and it's very interesting, is that in Ukraine, probably like in other countries, native language is very much the question of identity. So the sociologists, for example, like Volodymyr Kulik or Olga Onuch, who have researched this question intensively, have observed that declared native language and the particular meaning people attach to it can change depending on social context. And Ukrainian sociologists use different technologies to see what actually is the language that people prefer in everyday use. But again, another strong tendency is the growing salience of Ukrainian identity among Russian speakers. Here you can see the diversity of use of languages in different situations and in different social milieu. Ukrainian being mostly used in family surrounding, while Russian being, and both Ukrainian and Russian being still very important in, for example, business and work communication. So another area where we can see very strong changes after 2014 is geopolitical choices. So the support of the idea of joining EU has doubled nearly twice, while the support to joining any union that includes Russia decreased 5 times. There is also a strong tendency and strong support to Ukraine being non-aligned with any other geopolitical blocs. But when it comes to, for example, the support to NATO, it has remained regionally divisive question until very recently. So as we can see, the current acute stage of war has actually resulted in people being more and more supportive to the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. But this map shows how these geopolitical orientations have changed regionally. So in 2013, the idea of joining the EU has mostly been popular either in Western Ukraine or in Kiev, while we can really see this regional divergences. Whereas in 2015, actually most of regions in Western Central Ukraine has supported joining the EU, while East and Center also was prone of choosing non-alliance with any other blocs, but the support to EU has really increased in all Ukrainian regions. One could think that the military conflict will result in growing xenophobia and growing intolerance because people face violence on everyday basis. That would be quite a logical assumption. However, it's not the case of Ukraine. And we can see on this graph, it's quite a typical question that sociologists ask about social distance. So to what extent people are ready to accept representatives of different nationalities, either as their family members or friends or neighbors, work colleagues or tourists, or wouldn't let in the country at all. And we can see here in the middle the line of integrated index of social distance. And actually we can see that Ukrainians become more and more accepting to various ethnic national groups, except for Russians. So of course, because of the conflict, we see the very sharply growing social distance to Russians. But otherwise, this is something really, really unique for Ukrainian society. It hasn't become very radicalized due to the military conflict. Interestingly, when it comes to the evaluation of economic situation in Ukraine, we see the clear decline in 1998, which was the time of very strong economic crisis in post-Soviet space, including Ukraine. There is again a significant rise of hope and of positive evaluation after the Orange Revolution. And of course, the war resulted in the decline of this evaluation. And 2019 marks again quite a strong optimism, which was only challenged and endangered by the COVID pandemic in 2020. So this picture shows us that when it comes to recent years, Ukrainian society have somehow learned to live with war in their backyard, in their house, but still people were trying to rebuild their lives. And on many measurements, we see the increasing hopes and increasing positive evaluation of what is happening in the state. Interestingly, when we look on life satisfaction, in two last years, in 2019 and 20, is the first time when the number of those who are fully or rather satisfied with their lives is more than those who are not satisfied. So this shows us the interesting effect of 2019 election, which I think has shown the unity of Ukrainian society, despite the political campaign being quite polarizing. But because there was a unified, more than 70% people voted for the same candidate, I think it shows us the importance of this positive unifying political agenda, and also the feeling of representation. So because so many people supported one candidate, it has really boosted the feeling of societal optimism. And of course, one of the most important legacies of these 8 years is quite a high level of civic engagement. So since the beginning of the military conflict in Donbas, many people have been involved in numerous volunteering activities, like, for example, helping the army or donating money to the charity, or helping the internally displaced people from Donbas and Crimea. Of course, if we look at 2017, there is a decrease of such activity, also because the intensity of conflict has decreased. But I think this unprecedented level of social mobilization and of networks of support that we see now in Ukraine during the war, the acute stage of war, is also the result of this experience of very active civic engagement in the last 8 years. So I'd like to devote the last part of my presentation to the changes in Ukrainian society after February 24. And of course, something that was absolutely unprecedented, and I think that was a huge surprise for many analysts, was the level of societal resistance, particularly in southern and eastern Ukraine. Here on this map, you can see the rally, the protest in the city of Melitopol in southern Ukraine, which was already then occupied for 2 weeks. And people here are coming, bare hand to meet Russian tanks and to protest against Russian occupation. So not only people didn't meet Ukrainian soldiers with flowers like Putin probably have expected, and his analysts for that matter, but actually the resistance and resilience was quite strong. Of course, now already 3 months into occupation, such rallies and such protests don't happen that often. There has been a huge wave of repressions against activists. The second tendency being depopulation, and many people, as high as 50–60% of population, trying to leave these areas. But something that has been the result of unification of Ukrainian society, of strengthening of Ukrainian identity, of a stronger representation, is the fact how powerful was the resistance, and still is. So sociologists are still conducting telephone interviews, even in these times, sometimes working from the bomb shelters, if there is an air raid alarm. But when we present the sociological data from this, in such circumstances, we should remember about certain peculiarities of sociological research in the times of war. So as I've mentioned, there is a strong depopulation and displacement. It is estimated that 6 million people have left Ukraine as refugees, and several million people have been internally displaced. It is impossible to reach refugees abroad by phone, but of course it's possible to do interviews with internally displaced people. The accessibility to people on the occupied territories is also very limited. Because, for example, now, if I remember correctly, the mobile phone connection in Kherson region, for example, has been totally cut off, and it is impossible to reach people there. And of course, we should remember about the socially desirable answers that in current conditions, when people are contacted by Ukrainian polling companies, are of course very much pro-Ukrainian. So just two graphs that show us this radical shifts that are happening also right now due to this full-scale invasion on the background of Russian war against Ukraine. Is one is very interesting. So it asks. The question has been asked persistently for many years, repeatedly. How do you think are the things in Ukraine, are the issues in Ukraine moving in the right or wrong direction? And predominantly people tend to say that they are moving in a wrong direction. Apart from 2019, when there was this uniting victory of Volodymyr Zelensky, and now. So there is a strong shift of choice towards saying that the things are moving in the right direction. Of course, it doesn't mean that people think that war is the right direction, but this is a tendency that many political scientists describe as rally around the flag effect, that in the state of existential crisis, people tend to unite around their country, around their leader, even stronger, and support the course of action that is taken by the political leadership. Similarly, people believe that Ukraine, so more than 90% of respondents believe that Ukraine will win the war, and the support towards joining NATO has been growing. Another most drastic change is the attitudes to Russians. The question has been asked also for many years, and we can see the fluctuations. the blue curve shows those who say that they treat Russians well, they have good attitudes towards Russian, and the orange curve shows those who say that their attitude is bad. What is very interesting is this period between 2014 and 19. So we see that actually first there is a clear majority of people who say that their attitudes towards Russians is bad, but then it kind of comes back to more positive attitude. Of course, the war has changed it radically, and now 92% of Ukrainians say that their attitudes to Russians is bad. When the war ends, whether they will be that forgiving as in 2019 remains a very open question, and probably not the question that is even to be asked right now. But this is the clear effect of war. So just to sum up the main tendencies that I've tried to describe in my presentation is that first and foremost, the identification with Ukraine and Ukrainian citizenship began not in 2014, but right after Ukraine achieved independence. And this formation of civic identity has been going on and was only exacerbated by the Russian invasion in 2014. The experience of protracted conflict has brought the networks and the background and the experience of strong civic engagement and horizontal mobilization that have reached a very strong level since the beginning of full-scale war of Russia against Ukraine, and many people being engaged in all kinds of volunteering activities right now, which is, of course, on the one hand, the result of this rally around the flag effect of war that I've been talking about, but also the result of Ukrainian citizens cherishing their country and doing everything to protect it. And I didn't show this graph, but also if we look on the number of people who said they are ready to defend Ukraine if the invasion starts, was only growing in the last couple of months preceding to the full-scale invasion. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope we will have some questions, and I'll try my best to answer them or to leave them open in case this is something up for discussion. Thank you.
Anna, thank you so much. This was fascinating and indeed provides a lot of insight, into Ukrainian society during the last years and indeed today. So I would like to open the floor for discussion. Please, you can either type your questions in the chat, or if you prefer to ask them directly, please raise your hands or just identify that you have questions so we have just some order. Actually, while we are waiting for questions, I wanted to ask you, I know that you haven't yet started working with interviewing refugees, but maybe based on those findings from your colleagues, is there any information about how many people would be eager to go back, not to Ukraine, but to those zones under occupation if the hot phase of war is if we have this frozen conflict? Would people be ready to go, to zones under Russian occupation, or is it a no? Just it ties well with this question, the attitude to Russians, and obviously a lot of people want to go home, but would they accept, the different regime if we have this kind of frozen conflict? If there's any indication already.
Thank you, Elena, for this question. there have been some already first attempts to survey Ukrainian refugees in various countries. And the question that has been asked is actually how ready they are to come back to Ukraine when the like the active, the most dangerous phase of war ends. And 80% they said that they want to come back. So actually the urge to come back has been quite high. And we can see that recent statistics of crossing the Ukrainian-Polish border is that more people are re-entering Ukraine than leaving Ukraine. So people are actively coming back to Kyiv, even to Kharkiv, which might, of course, still be dangerous, but their will to come back home is very strong. We didn't particularly, so not we, the scholars didn't particularly ask people about coming back to the occupied territories. I think the reason being that, in this hot phase, it's very difficult to predict how it will evolve. And of course, as I told, 90% of respondents hope that Ukraine will win and will deoccupy all of its territories. So for now, I cannot answer you this question, but I think that for those who left, mostly, if they would come back, they would probably come back to Ukrainian territories, not to the one that are occupied.
Thank you. Boris, I can see your hand.
Thank you, Anna, for this fascinating lecture, which really helped us orient a bit. I know this hasn't been the topic of your talk right now, but I wanted to ask about the role of 2004 and the Orange Revolution in that, because you stress very much that the Ukraine Nation project was something which was going on in 1991, basically, and then you stressed that obviously the events of 2014 did a major shift. But I want to hear about your opinion on 2004 and the process which developed after that and leading on to 2014.
Thank you very much. This is really a very important topic and question. I think that we kind of, because of everything that happened after 2014, we often forget about Orange Revolution and how important milestone it was in a history of independent Ukraine. So two things. First, it did result in a regionalized but societal optimism that has quickly decreased. But still, we see the increase of people as feeling more attached to Ukraine and hoping for a European future, hoping for basically a quick scenarios and quick solutions to Ukrainian problems, which of course didn't happen for many reasons. One being that President Yushchenko decided to focus more on historical and memory politics than economy, and other being that because of political reform, he really didn't have so much influence as it was expected of him. I think that comparing to Euromaidan, Orange Revolution was much more a messianic revolution. It was people putting a lot of hope into one person, which of course he couldn't fulfill for many reasons. But also the effect of this black PR political campaign and this like divisive maps and the attempts to polarize Ukrainian society, they were quite strong. And precisely after 2004, we see this growing polarization, which I think also resulted in the clashes during the Euromaidan. So that would be my very, very short answer. And yeah, I will add a good book on that to the reading list. Thank you.
Thank you. There is one question in the chat. How likely is it that we will see something similar to the current situation in Georgia? So I assume the current situation in Ukraine repeating itself in Georgia, if I understood the question correctly.
So you mean the full-scale war on South Ossetia and Abkhazia, I don't know, honestly. It's a question for probably military analysts, and I think that one of the reasons why Georgian political elites are behaving the way they are, so on the one hand, like proclaiming support to Ukraine, but also not imposing any anti-Russian sanctions and being very cautious, is their fear of such a scenario. And obviously, similar is the case of Moldova. And you know, the attempt of Russia to create this belt of instability around it, belt of depopulation, is very alarming, of course, not only for Ukraine. So it's difficult for me to estimate the likelihood of such a scenario, but it obviously influences the decision that politicians and also ordinary citizens are making.
Thank you. Liao, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Hey, Anna,
Hi.
so good to see you.
So good to see you too.
I know, yeah, it's really been a while.
Yes.
To those of you who do not know that I spent a wonderful summer with Anna at the Borderland Summer School, and really it was it's such a great, wonderful memory, and certainly it's so good to see you again today. So I guess my question really comes from some of my students' questions when I explained the current situation to them in my history classes. They would ask me questions like, you know, I read from the mass media that Zelensky banned some pro-Russian parties. Oh gosh, like he should have like banned them a long time ago. And then they would also ask me, so when we talk about those pro-Russia parties in Ukraine, are we talking about, say, they are like pro the idea of unification with Russia or not? My explanation to them is that, you know, like this notion of pro Russia is too general, too broad, right? There might be some of those parties or political elites in Ukraine that simply just wanted to have a closer relationship, you know, in business, in trading relations with Russia, not necessarily politically speaking for like this Russian Ukraine unification. Could you just, you know, talk more in that regard? I am personally also very curious about, you know, like this broader pro Russia political sects or those parties. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's quite a complicated question. The political field of pro-Russian parties in Ukraine is not homogeneous at all. So there are different business and political structures involved which are competing against each other quite strongly. So there is the like opposition platform for life and the other blocks. So I think one of the questions is that these politicians, they have reacted to Russian invasion in a very diverse way. So for example, we have the case of Alexander Vilko, who is the mayor of Kryvyi Rih, the native city of Volodymyr Zelensky, who was considered to be one of the like strongest pro-Russian politicians in Ukraine. But after the beginning of full-scale war, he actually made a very strong pro-Ukrainian position, and he's been very vocal about his resistance and the will to protect the city from the possibility of Russian invasion. The same holds true, for example, for the mayors of Kharkiv or Odessa. So this field is by no means homogeneous, and I think it will be very strongly transformed due to the war. And I think that many of those politicians who were considered pro-Russian are now thinking how to regroup and what other ideas to choose as a political agenda. But of course, like some of them advocated strong unification with Russia, while others really mostly supported some concessions in this peace talks in Minsk agreement, or argued that, you know, the business and economic interests of Ukraine lies in the cooperation with Russia. So, so you are very right to tell your students that there is no single pro-Russian party, and one should take a nuanced approach to the political actors who have been considered pro-Russian in Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, it's a very wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I think there was something in the chat. I'm not sure if it was personally to me or to everybody. I will try to open it.
I think it was for you, because
yes, that's for me. Okay, so I will read the question aloud. And you said that the longer the occupation lasts, the more difficult it will be for people to get together. What do you think are the prospects of settlement being reached over the next few months or year? Is there a danger of there being permanent partition? The experience of Cyprus is telling. By the way, I am of Cypriot origin. Thank you very much for this question. I'm sure it has a lot of personal dimension to you. So, you know, as going through this myself, I just first and foremost want to express my support and my sympathy. I think that currently we are in the situation when the peace talks are very unlikely, and because, you know, Russia wants to secure as much territorial gains as it has, and we are in the midst of very active and very bloody fightings in the Donbas region. Whereas for Ukraine to agree for Russian terms would basically mean capitulation and the prospect of even bloodier war in a certain period of time. So I don't know. It's really difficult for me to say without you know, getting emotional or personal. I do hope that Ukraine will be deoccupied. I understand all the problems that it entails, and the fact that, you know, human lives are being lost every day. So my answer to your question is I really don't know.
Anna, there is another question on Crimea. Okay. Could you speak perhaps a little bit to the conditions in Crimea? Obviously, it's hard, if not impossible, to conduct field work there. But what do we know about locals' attitudes towards Ukraine, Russia, the state of temporary occupation, and the future of the region?
I think that Crimea is one of those vivid example of people with more pro-Ukrainian attitudes being basically squeezed out of this area because of political persecutions. And we know that there have been many cases of imprisonment of Crimean Tatar and Ukrainian activists. So my first answer to your question is that it's very difficult to be pro-Ukrainian in Crimea right now. And it was also very difficult before. So it's not that this political persecutions have started in February. They have been going on for 8 years. However, I'd like to remind you about a certain guerrilla action when the city hall of Chebotarova was painted blue and yellow. So I think that there are still attempts of resistance, but also it's extremely difficult to evaluate how much pro-Ukrainian activists or people with pro-Ukrainian views are left there. And obviously it's a very silenced topic. And also we shouldn't forget that currently Crimea is basically a huge military basis. So most of military equipment and soldiers that are invading southern Ukraine go through Crimea, and obviously this situation has a huge impact on the people that live there, and also on the spiral of silence. I don't think anybody would be ready to talk openly about their attitudes in Crimea now.
If I may, maybe I would just add, there was a report I read recently that actually Crimean hospitals are also full of
Yes.
wounded soldiers and those who died, and that every day there are a lot of burials and so on and so on. And in a way, perhaps it's not only the military that is passing to Ukraine, but also those returning. Yeah. And this would definitely, I think, affect, kind of the way people see Russia, because it's not only kind of the victory, that they think it will bring, but also they see really the result and the human cost of this. But yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to judge and to see. Are there any other questions or comments to Anna? If not, I would just like to thank you, Anna, for joining us today, for finding the time and for this fascinating talk. And I would just say that this was our concluding lecture, the last lecture in our virtual lecture series. And we will be working now towards a publication in Spanish for those who were not able to follow or would like to know more. And yeah, we will hear from us again, hopefully in the very near future. Thank you very much to everyone joining us and being with us throughout these 2 months. And thank you for your support, mainly to Ukraine, because your interest nowadays is very important. Your interest and the desire to know more about the region and the country and their people. Thank you once again to everyone. And
I may just add, thank you so much, everyone. It was my pleasure, despite the gravity of the topic. And just a reminder, something that Olena already said: please support Razum for Ukraine initiative. They are doing amazing job, and they are supporting both civilians and doctors and military in Ukraine. And we appreciate their work a lot. And our intellectual endeavors are also a part of supporting their activity.
Yes, the link is, I distributed the link today, but it's also in every announcement I send. There is also a link to Razum initiative. Thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of your day.